Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. The steam clung to the bathroom mirror in a soft, hazy film as the last drops of the hot shower tapped against the tiles like a whispered rhythm. Her bare feet padded across the cool wooden floor of the hallway, the scent of lavender body wash still lingering in the air. She held the towel close, clutched loosely around her chest, droplets tracing down the curve of her shoulder. The door creaked open just as she turned the corner, and then she froze. He was there. Standing in the doorway of the guest room, his hand halfway to the doorknob, eyes wide, and then narrowing into something unreadable. A quiet hush fell between them, thick with something neither of them had ever dared to name. His gaze dropped for the briefest second, not far, just enough to catch the outline of her damp collarbone, then quickly flicked back up. Not a word passed. But something in the way he stood, rigid, tense, like a man caught in a place he knew he shouldn't be, said everything. Her breath caught, and for a moment, time bent inward. The towel slipped, not entirely, but enough that her hand jolted to catch it. The silence cracked like a spark. He stepped back, only slightly, like the distance might break the pull between them, but it didn't. Her eyes followed him, drawn, confused, almost, hoping. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," she murmured, barely above a whisper. His voice came low, gravelly. "I know." And still he didn't leave. She turned, slowly, pulling the towel back into place with careful fingers, every motion deliberate, but not hurried. When she finally faced him again, he was watching her, not with guilt, not with shame, but something more complex. Something burning just beneath the surface. "I left my shirt in there," she said, trying for casual. "The white one." His white one. He gave a slow nod, but didn't move. Then, almost without thinking, he reached behind the door and held it out to her. The shirt was warm from where it had rested against the radiator. She took it, fingers grazing his. A pause. Just long enough to feel the static crackle at the edge of what could never be. "Thanks," she said, her voice soft. He nodded again but didn't look away. And neither did she. Then the sound of a key turning in the front lock shattered the stillness. Their eyes widened, moment broken, tension spiked. They stepped apart, too fast, the air between them suddenly cold. But it was already too late. Something had changed. It hadn't started this way. The closeness had once been innocent, an unspoken comfort they both reached for when the house felt too quiet or when the silences with their partners stretched too long. Movie nights where knees touched a little too long under the blanket. Shared coffee on cold mornings, steam rising between glances held a beat too long. It was subtle. Harmless. Or at least that's what they told themselves. But somewhere between the borrowed books and late-night talks in the kitchen, something shifted. It was the way she spoke softer when it was just them. The way his gaze lingered just a little too long when she laughed. They both noticed. And yet, they said nothing. One night, after a storm had knocked the power out, they sat in candlelight while the others slept upstairs. She'd shivered, he'd said nothing, but gently placed his hand against the small of her back. Not low. Not high. Just there. Steady. Warm. She hadn't moved. The silence swelled between them, heavy with words unsaid. Now, as she stood there wearing his shirt, the memory flashed across both their minds. She adjusted the hem, suddenly self-conscious. He took a step forward, his hand moving slightly, as if to reach out, but stopping mid-air. Her breath caught as the space between them tightened. "I shouldn't be here," he said, voice barely audible. "You already are," she replied, eyes fixed on the floor. He moved closer. Close enough for her to feel his breath graze the curve of her neck. Her heart thudded hard. And then, as though something in him cracked, he pulled back. "I can't do this," he whispered. She didn't answer. Her fingers clenched the fabric of his shirt, knuckles white. He turned and walked away, slow, shoulders tense, each step a battle. She stayed frozen in the hallway, skin tingling where the air had cooled after his breath. A tremble in her fingertips. Her eyes stared past where he had been, heart pounding, like something fragile had just been left behind. Then, suddenly, the silence broke. A phone buzzed loudly on the table. One message. One name. A shadow passed across her face as she turned toward the screen. Someone new. The guest room door clicked shut with a soft finality, sealing them in the quiet. The kind of quiet that made every breath feel like a confession. Outside, the evening light had dipped into gold and shadow, casting slow-moving stripes across the walls through half-closed blinds. The air was thick, dense with everything they hadn't said. She stood near the dresser, arms crossed loosely over her chest, wearing his white shirt like a second skin. Damp hair clung to her neck. He stood just a few feet away, the silence between them no longer awkward, but charged. It trembled with restraint. "You didn't have to bring it to me," she said, not looking up. He stepped closer. "You were shivering." She turned her head slightly, eyes meeting his. And that's when it started again, the slow unraveling. His fingers twitched at his side before he raised a hand, almost hesitant. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, tucking it gently behind her ear. She didn't move, only let her eyes flutter shut for half a second at the touch. When she opened them, his hand lingered near her cheek, close enough to feel the warmth. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her voice trembling like it wanted to break. "Neither do I," he said, softer still. But he didn't step back. His thumb brushed her cheek, slow, thoughtful. Her breath came shallow, her chest rising beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. One button, just one, had come undone at the top. She hadn't noticed. He had. Her hand reached up, fingers grazing his wrist, not to stop him, but to hold him there. He leaned in, close, so close that she could feel the soft press of his breath against her lips. Their foreheads nearly touched. Lips parted. Hearts in sync. But still, they didn't kiss. His hand slid to her waist, feather-light, pausing there. She moved forward, almost involuntarily, as if pulled. Then, just when the world seemed to narrow to nothing but that breath between them, knock knock. The sound shattered the silence. They froze. A voice, muffled but unmistakable, called from outside the door. "Dinner's ready." He exhaled, long and tight. Her eyes were wide. Neither moved. "Coming," she managed to say, voice almost lost in the air. They both stepped back. Too far. Too fast. Like they'd touched fire. But the burn had already sunk deep. Morning crept in slowly, dragging a pale gray light across the guest room walls. The warmth from the night before had gone, replaced by a fragile stillness, the kind that settles in after something irreversible. The white shirt lay wrinkled on the edge of the bed, buttons half fastened. A pair of coffee mugs sat untouched on the dresser, their steam long gone. She sat at the edge of the bed, hair tousled, legs pulled in, her bare knees hugged to her chest. The silence between them was no longer electric, it was hollow. And loud. He stood near the window, one hand on the sill, the other gripping the back of his neck. His shoulders were tight. His jaw unmoving. He hadn't looked at her since he woke. She swallowed the tightness rising in her throat. "Say something," she whispered. He didn't turn. "What do you want me to say?" "That it meant something," she answered, voice thin. "That last night wasn't just," she couldn't finish the sentence. He turned then. Slowly. His face was unreadable. "We didn't even," he stopped. "We stopped." "Did we?" she asked, eyes flicking to his. "Because my heart didn't." The words hung between them like fog. His eyes softened, but his body stayed distant. We let it get too far. Again. She looked down, fingers twisting in the hem of the shirt. It wasn't just physical, you know that. It's never been. I know, he said quietly. And that's the problem. He moved to the chair across the room, sat heavily. She turned slightly, watching him through strands of messy hair. You regret it, she said, not as a question. I regret how it keeps making me forget who I am, he answered, voice barely above a breath. I forget that I'm not supposed to want this. But you do, she said, a thread of defiance breaking through the ache. Even now. He didn't deny it. Instead, he rubbed his hands over his face and stood up, brushing past the bed, not meeting her eyes. I have to go, he murmured. She rose too, reaching for the shirt, pulling it tighter around her. You always do. At the door, he paused, hand on the handle. He turned just enough for her to see the weight behind his words. We can't keep doing this. And then he was gone. The door closed gently behind him, but it felt like a door inside her had slammed shut. It had been 3 days. 3 long, careful, torturous days since he'd closed the door behind him with that final line echoing in her chest. We can't keep doing this. But silence hadn't brought clarity, only more tension, twisted tighter with each passing glance, each near touch that didn't happen. They hadn't spoken since. But they saw each other. Constantly. In the kitchen, where the smell of coffee no longer brought comfort. On the patio, where conversations twisted politely around everything but what mattered. In the hallway, where their arms brushed by accident, and neither dared to turn around. Then came the dinner. Everyone was there, laughing, talking, as if nothing had cracked beneath the surface. She sat at one end of the table, he at the other. But their eyes met over plates and wine glasses like magnets refusing to stay apart. A glance too long. A pause too loaded. She watched as another woman, a friend of the family, laughed at something he said, her fingers grazing his arm too easily. The flare of heat in her chest surprised her. It was jealousy. Raw. Unwanted. She dropped her fork, the clatter masking her sharp inhale. When she looked up again, he was already watching her. His smile had faded. He excused himself first, claiming a call. She followed minutes later, needing air. She found him on the back porch, staring out into the dusk, phone still in hand but untouched. You're good at pretending, she said softly. He didn't turn. So are you. She stepped beside him, keeping just enough distance. Does she know you flinch every time someone says my name? His jaw tightened. Don't do that. Do what? She asked, voice trembling. Pretend we didn't almost, he turned suddenly, eyes dark, full of things he hadn't let himself say. We didn't. You think that makes it better? She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Then her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, eyes widening. Her chest hollowed. The message she meant to type and delete, the one she drafted the night he left, had sent. Not to herself. To his partner. Just 3 words. I miss you. She looked at him, panic blooming. He took the phone from her hand, reading the screen. His face drained. Silence. And then, soft and almost broken, he whispered, What did you do? The silence was deafening. He stared at the phone in his hand, her message still glowing on the screen like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The words, I miss you, echoed louder than any scream could. She stood across from him, lips parted, chest rising and falling like she'd just run a race she never wanted to finish. I didn't mean to send it, she whispered. But you wrote it, he shot back, voice trembling, not from anger, but something worse. Betrayal. Regret. Fear. The back door creaked open. His partner stood there. Frozen. Eyes flitting from him to the phone in his hand. And then to her. Time folded in. "I'm sorry," she said. She didn't even know who she was apologizing to anymore. His partner didn't speak, didn't have to. The quiet crackled, charged with betrayal. Her hands shook at her sides, and then she laughed, a bitter, soft thing. "You couldn't even lie properly." He took a step forward, but she stepped back. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp now. "Don't touch me. Don't say it didn't mean anything." "It wasn't like that," he said, almost desperate. "Oh," she scoffed. "Then tell me exactly what it was." He opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked at her, the woman in his shirt just nights ago. Her eyes welled, but she didn't move. She couldn't. It felt like her body had turned to glass. "You said we stopped," she whispered. "You said it didn't happen." "It didn't," he said, but his voice cracked. His partner's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Then why does it feel like it did?" The air broke. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and he stepped away, too late. Too slow. She turned to him, voice low and shaking. "It was never supposed to happen." And then she walked away, back through the door, into the house where everything would now sound different, feel different. He stood still. The other woman stood across from him, shoulders shaking, heart splintering. But neither moved. The house was quiet again. But it wasn't peace, it was aftermath. He sat on the patio, the same one where stolen glances had once felt like promises. Now, it was just a bench beneath a cloudy sky. A half-full coffee mug rested on the armrest, untouched. He hadn't slept. The shirt he wore was wrinkled, the kind of unkempt that didn't come from laziness, but from not knowing what else to do. The door opened behind him. Her footsteps were soft, careful. She didn't sit beside him. Just stood there, arms folded across her chest like a shield. "I came to say goodbye," she said, her voice low and even. He didn't move. "I figured." She looked out at the backyard, where the wind nudged the trees but couldn't quite move them. "You haven't said anything." "What would I say?" he replied. "That I'm sorry? That I didn't mean to hurt anyone?" "I did. I did all of it." She didn't argue. The silence between them wasn't the same as before, it wasn't charged. It was heavy. Sad. "I replay it in my head," she admitted. "All of it. Every time we almost kissed. Every time I didn't stop it." He turned to look at her. "Would you take it back?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she looked older. Not in age, but in spirit. "I'd take back the timing," she said. "But not the way you made me feel." A long breath escaped him. "I loved you," he said. "I don't know when it started. But I did." She blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek, slow and silent. She didn't wipe it away. "I think I did too," she whispered. Neither moved closer. Neither asked for more. "I need to go," she said. "She deserves better." "So do we." He nodded. "Will you be okay?" She paused, then smiled, soft, sad. "Eventually." She walked away, the same way she had once entered his life, quietly, like a secret. He stayed on the bench long after the sound of her car faded. The coffee grew cold. The sky finally cracked open and rained. But for once, he didn't run for cover. He let it fall.